Kara had not spoken to her mother in 3 years. This was not something she was proud of. It was simply the outcome of a relationship that had become too complicated to maintain and too painful to repair, and had eventually collapsed under the weight of both of those things simultaneously. She had moved to a different city. She had built a different life. She had made peace with the distance in the gradual and imperfect way that people make peace with things they cannot change. She did not regret the decision, but she thought about her mother more than she admitted to anyone. On a Tuesday evening in October, she came home from work, made dinner, watched something she would not remember afterward, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. She woke at 2:20 in the morning to the sound of her phone. By the time she reached it, the call had ended. She looked at the screen, unknown number. She put the phone down and lay back. Then she noticed the voicemail notification. She almost left it until morning. She picked the phone back up. She played the voicemail. There was silence at first, the particular silence of a connected call where someone is present but not speaking. She could hear the faint ambient sound of a room on the other end, the distant hum of something electrical. Then breathing, slow and slightly laboured in the specific way she had heard breathing become laboured when someone was very tired or very unwell. She sat up in bed. She listened to the breathing for 10 seconds. Then a voice, her mother's voice, saying her name, just her name, nothing else. The way her mother had said her name when she was a child and her mother was looking for her in the house. That particular combination of sound that only one person in the world had ever produced in exactly that way. Then silence again. Then the call ended. Kara sat in her dark bedroom for a long time. She told herself there were explanations, a misdial, a dream half remembered, a voice that resembled her mother's in the specific way that tired minds at 2 in the morning found resemblances everywhere. She played the voicemail again and again. She sat with the phone in her hands until the sky outside her window began to lighten. In the morning, she called the number back. The automated voice told her the number was not in service. She called her aunt, her mother's sister, the only member of her family she had maintained any contact with since the distance had grown. Her aunt answered on the 3rd ring. She sounded strange from the first word. She asked Kara where she was. She asked if Kara was sitting down. Kara asked what had happened. Her aunt told her. Her mother had passed away during the night, peacefully in her sleep at home. The neighbours had found her that morning. They estimated she had passed sometime in the early hours. Kara looked at her phone, at the voicemail notification still sitting on her screen. She looked at the time the call had come in, 2:20 in the morning. She asked her aunt if her mother had a mobile phone. Her aunt said yes, she had gotten one a few years ago. She had learned to use it reasonably well toward the end. Kara asked if she knew the number. Her aunt read it out. Kara looked at the unknown number in her missed calls. She did not need to compare them. She already knew they were the same. She sat on the edge of her bed for a very long time after the call with her aunt ended. She thought about 3 years of distance. She thought about things unsaid in the particular way they are unsaid when you believe there is still time to say them. She thought about a voice saying her name in the dark, just her name, in the tone of a person who is looking for someone and wanted, before everything ended, to find them one more time. Paul had lived in his apartment building for 4 years without knowing most of his neighbours by name. This was not unusual for the city. The building had 32 units spread across 6 floors, and the rhythms of urban apartment living did not naturally produce the kind of sustained proximity that led to real familiarity. You learned faces, you learned which neighbour left their recycling outside the wrong door, and which one played music too late on weeknights. You learned the shape of people's routines without learning anything about the people themselves. Paul was on the 4th floor, Unit 14. The unit directly across the hall was Unit 15. For the first 3 years of his tenancy, Unit 15 had been occupied by a quiet woman in her 50s who he had exchanged enough brief hallway pleasantries with to know that her name was Margaret, and that she worked somewhere in the financial sector, and that she owned a cat that occasionally sat in her front window watching the hallway through the frosted glass panel in her door. Margaret moved out in the spring of his 4th year. A new tenant moved in 6 weeks later. Paul heard the move-in from his apartment, the sounds of furniture being navigated through the hallway, the particular choreography of moving boxes through a narrow space. He opened his door to offer help in the way that he considered a reasonable neighbourly gesture, and caught a brief glimpse of a man in his 30s, directing 2 movers with the focused energy of someone who had packed and unpacked many times and had a clear system. The man glanced at Paul and nodded. Paul nodded back and went inside. He did not think about his new neighbour for the next several days. Then he began noticing things, small things at first. The light under the door of Unit 15 was always on. Not sometimes, always. Every time Paul left his apartment or returned to it, regardless of the hour, the thin strip of light under the door of Unit 15 was visible in the hallway. 3 in the morning returning from a late shift. 6 in the morning leaving early for a meeting. Noon on a Saturday, midnight on a Tuesday. Always on. Paul assumed his neighbour simply kept unusual hours or left his lights on habitually. Then he noticed the second thing. He never heard anything from Unit 15. Not music, not television, not the sounds of cooking or conversation or the ordinary domestic noise that apartment walls transmitted, whether their occupants wanted them to or not even footsteps. In 4 years in the building, Paul had learned the acoustic personality of every unit near his own. He knew the particular creak of the floor in Unit 13. He knew the sound the pipes made in Unit 16 when the shower ran. From Unit 15, he heard nothing, not once, in 4 months. He began paying closer attention. He started noting the times he entered and left his apartment, and whether he saw or heard any sign of activity from across the hall. Over 6 weeks of informal observation, he compiled a picture that made no sense. The light was always on. He never heard a sound. He never saw the door open or close. He never encountered his neighbour in the hallway, the elevator, the lobby, or anywhere else in the building. He asked the building manager casually whether the tenant in 15 had settled in all right. The building manager looked at him with a slight frown. She said Unit 15 was unoccupied. Paul told her that someone had moved in 4 months ago. He described the move-in, the man, the 2 movers, the furniture going through the hallway. The building manager checked her records. She told him that Unit 15 had been vacant since Margaret had moved out in the spring. No new lease had been signed, no new tenant had been approved. The unit had been listed and had not yet found a taker. Paul went back to his floor. He stood in the hallway outside his apartment. The light under the door of Unit 15 was on. He stood there for a long time. Then he did something he had not done in 4 months of living across the hall from whoever or whatever was in Unit 15. He knocked on the door. Nothing. He knocked again. Silence from inside. he put his hand on the door handle. He stood there with his hand on the handle for a very long time. Then he went inside his own apartment and sat down and did not get up again for the rest of the evening. He requested a transfer to a different unit the following morning. He told the building manager he needed a change of scenery. She processed his request without comment. He moved to the second floor 3 weeks later. On his last night on the 4th floor, he stood in the hallway with his packed bags and looked at the door of Unit 15-1 final time. The light was on. He took the elevator down. He did not look back. And in the weeks that followed in his new apartment on the 2nd floor, in the quiet moments before sleep, he thought about that light, always on, never answered, keeping whatever hours it kept in a unit that officially did not exist. He thought about it for a long time. He never arrived at an explanation that satisfied him. He suspected he never would. The last train from the city ran at 12:47. Everyone who used it regularly knew this in the specific way that commuters know timetables, not consciously but physically, as a rhythm built into the body over months and years of repetition. Nina had caught the 12:47 more times than she could count. She worked late by nature. Her job in the city involved the kind of hours that made the last train not an occasional necessity, but a near nightly routine. She knew the platform. She knew the particular group of regulars who always made it by the skin of their teeth, the same faces arranged in the same configuration of exhaustion, loosened ties and tote bags, and the collective silence of people too tired for conversation. She knew the train itself, the specific rattle of the third carriage, the way the heating ran too hot in winter and not at all in summer, the exact seat she preferred, second from the back on the left, which gave her a clear view of the carriage and enough distance from both ends to feel the particular kind of anonymous that late-night commuters needed. On the night of the 14th of November, she arrived at the platform with 4 minutes to spare. The platform was quieter than usual, only 2 other people waiting. A young man with headphones and a woman in a business suit reading something on her phone. The train arrived, they boarded. Nina took her usual seat. The carriage was nearly empty. The young man sat near the front. The woman in the suit took a seat in the middle. Nina settled into her spot near the back and closed her eyes before the train had even left the station. She did not intend to sleep. She never intended to sleep on the last train. But the warmth of the carriage and the rhythm of the tracks and the accumulated tiredness of the week pulled her under within minutes. She woke to silence. The train was stopped. She looked out the window, a station, lights on the platform, the automatic doors open. She looked at her phone to check how many stops she had missed. Her phone was dead. She looked around the carriage to get her bearings from another passenger. The carriage was empty. The young man was gone. The woman in the suit was gone. The entire carriage was empty. She stood up and looked through the connecting door to the next carriage. Empty. She moved through the train from carriage to carriage, every one of them empty. She was the only person on the train. She went back to her carriage and looked out at the platform. She did not recognize the station. This was disorienting but not immediately alarming. She had fallen asleep. She had missed her stop. This was a station further down the line that she had no reason to know. She stepped off the train onto the platform. The doors closed behind her immediately. The train pulled away. She watched the red lights of the last carriage disappear into the dark. She turned to look at the station. It was lit but completely empty. No staff, no other passengers, no ticket barriers, no signage visible from where she was standing. She walked toward the exit, looking for a station name. She found one above the main entrance. She did not recognize it. She pulled out her phone to search for it. Still dead. She walked through the exit onto the street outside. A road, streetlights, a row of houses set back from the pavement, the ordinary geography of a residential street somewhere outside the city. Completely still, completely silent, no cars, no movement in any of the windows, no sound from anywhere. She walked along the street looking for anything she recognized. She walked for 20 minutes without finding anything familiar and without seeing another living person. Then she turned a corner and stopped. At the end of the next street was a train station. She walked toward it. The platform was lit. A train was waiting. She looked at the destination board. Her station, the one she had been trying to reach. She got on the train without questioning it. She sat in the second seat from the back on the left. The train moved. It arrived at her station 11 minutes later. She got off and walked home and sat at her kitchen table until the sun came up. She looked up the station name she had found above the exit in the early morning light. No results. No station by that name existed on any line running out of the city. She checked again. Nothing. She sat with her cold coffee and thought about an empty train and an empty street and a station that did not exist, letting her go after 20 minutes, as though it had simply been assessing her and found whatever it was looking for, or not found it. She was never sure which interpretation was more comforting. She caught the 12:47 the following week. She did not sleep. She has not slept on a train since, and she has never again been the last passenger in a carriage on the last train of the night, because she knows now, in the way that you only know something after experiencing it directly, that the last train does not always go where it is supposed to go, and it does not always carry only the living.